Hello, everybody. My name is Vinaya Manchaiah. I serve as the professor of otolaryngology, head and neck surgery at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. I also have a position as the director of audiology at the University of Colorado Hospital, UC Health. My talk today focuses on hearing healthcare professionals and consumers' views on over-the-counter hearing aids. Before I start the talk, I wanted to share some acknowledgement to my colleagues who are involved in some of the studies that I'll be discussing today. Also, acknowledgements to various institutions that I'm affiliated with. In particular, I wanted to share the website of our laboratory, Virtual Hearing Lab. We are doing a fair amount of work on hearing aids, in particular over-the-counter hearing aids, and some of that may be of interest to you. Also, thanks to colleagues from Hearing Tracker who helped collect the data that I'll be discussing in this presentation. I do serve as a scientific advisor for the HearX group. So the learning outcomes for this talk include these three aspects. So the first, at the end of this talk, hopefully you should be able to discuss the categories of hearing devices that are currently in the US market. Describe the views expressed by hearing healthcare professionals about OTC hearing aids, as well as consumers about direct-to-consumer hearing healthcare model. And finally, list a few practice implications of examining stakeholder views on OTC hearing aids and DTC hearing healthcare model. So here is the talk outline. I'll start off by providing some background information, mainly discussing the device categories and summarizing the literature. Moving on from there, I'll discuss a study that was conducted on hearing healthcare professionals, understanding their views towards OTC hearing aids, and then a study focusing on consumers on their views towards the direct-to-consumer hearing healthcare model, and finally discussing some practice implications of these studies. Okay, so let's start by reviewing the device categories that are currently in the US market. So in this image, you see prescription hearing aids to the one end and consumer audio devices to the other end. And these are the two device categories that we are very familiar with. And during the last decade, there has been a merger of these two device categories, creating a whole range of other categories listed in this image. So you see that we have device categories such as hearables and PSAPs, which are direct-to-consumer hearing devices, which are not meant to be for people with hearing loss, but instead focused on people with normal hearing as a hearing enhancement devices. To the other side, next to prescription hearing aids, you can also see that we have two types of over-the-counter hearing aids. Since October 2022, these two categories are in the US market. And the preset OTC hearing aids are the devices where there are some preset programs that the users can choose. And these are generally at a lower cost point of something around $200 to $300, starting with $200 to $300. And the self-fitting hearing aids are the devices where users have the ability to perform a self-testing, institute testing of their hearing. And then using a smartphone application, they will be able to program their hearing aid to their hearing loss. And these are generally of a higher cost. They range anywhere from $600 to $2,400, but generally speaking, they're at about $800 to $900. So in my opinion, the preset OTC hearing aids are very close to PSAPs, whereas the self-fitting hearing aids are very close to low-cost digital hearing aids. So to sum this up, we now have a range of hearing devices to be able to meet the needs of a range of consumers. And let's also take a quick look at the literature in the direct-to-consumer hearing device space. So much of the knowledge on OTC hearing aids actually come from studies that were done before 2020. At this time, there was no category of OTC hearing aids. So much of the research in this space comes from direct-to-consumer hearing devices such as PSAPs or direct mail hearing aids and things like that. So there have been a few literature reviews summarizing the outcomes of direct-to-consumer hearing devices. And these studies generally fall into three categories. So the first category of studies focus on acoustic quality of hearing devices. These are the studies performing electroacoustic testing in a test box. And generally, some of the early studies show that the devices, the direct-to-consumer devices such as PSAPs, were of very poor acoustic quality, whereas some more recent studies do highlight that some of the devices included in the studies have appropriate acoustic characteristics for people with hearing loss, in specific people with mild to moderate hearing loss. The second group of studies focus on large-scale consumer surveys. These are studies involving surveys such as Market Track, Eurotrack, Japan Track, and things like that. And these studies focus on outcomes of hearing aid users in terms of benefit and satisfaction. And the studies were mainly conducted on users of PSAPs and direct mail hearing aids. And overall, the large-scale consumer surveys conclude that people who are using direct-to-consumer hearing devices had much lower benefit and satisfaction when compared to people who are using prescription hearing aids fitted by hearing care professionals. Okay, and finally, the third group of studies are clinical trials. That means these are the studies that focus on measuring either self-reported outcomes, such as benefit and satisfaction, or behavioral outcomes, such as speech perception in quiet or speech perception in noise. One of the main criticism for clinical trials on DTC hearing devices is that most of the studies are of single group pre and post design. This means they did not include a control group. And only a few studies have been well conducted with a control group as well as using a randomization. These studies generally show that people who used direct-to-consumer hearing devices have measurable positive outcomes in terms of self-reported benefit and satisfaction as well as behavioral measures. Again, the main criticism on the literature on this is that most of the studies were on DTC hearing devices, and there are only a handful of studies that were conducted using OTC hearing aids that are currently in the market. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why the knowledge generated from this may not be directly translatable into OTC hearing devices. Okay, so now let's look at a recent study that was focused on understanding hearing healthcare professionals' views on over-the-counter hearing aids. And this study was conducted in collaboration with the Hearing Tracker. Hearing Tracker is a platform or a website that provides information about hearing healthcare, in particularly hearing devices to consumers, as well as to hearing healthcare professionals. So the study used a retrospective cross-sectional design. So this is a retrospective study mainly because researchers, that means we were not involved in creating the survey. The survey was designed and conducted by colleagues at Hearing Tracker. And the survey was conducted in August 2022 using online platforms such as Facebook and LinkedIn. And the survey was done through a question scout platform. 653 hearing healthcare professionals completed the survey, which included 22-item questionnaire. So of the 22 items, 5 of the questions were focused on some basic demographic information, and the remaining 17 questions were focused on understanding the concerns about OTC hearing aids. So one of the key limitations of this study is that the demographic information did not include questions on age, gender, duration in practice, and things like that. And in terms of the 17-item concern statements, so these statements were grouped into 5 domains, focusing on safety, device handling and adjustments, service delivery model, counseling and audiological care, and then finally on optimal benefits and adverse events. So these 17 items were worded as a concern statement, And then the users could answer these questions using a 5-point Likert scale, which ranged from strongly agree to strongly disagree. A strongly agree, rated with a 5, and strongly disagree rated with a 1. A strongly agree basically means that hearing healthcare professionals agree that OTC hearing aids are concerning. And we did a range of analysis using this data. So let's look at some of the descriptive data. So it is interesting to see that 55%, that means just over half of the participants, answered saying that they will support patients with OTC hearing aids purchased elsewhere. And nearly quarter, 27% of the participant answered saying that they will sell OTC hearing aids in their clinic or in their clinic website. And also just over 40% also reported that they will offer unbundled prices to compete with OTC hearing aid price. Okay, so these data is fairly similar to a few other surveys that have been done in this space. Now let's move on to looking at the responses to the 17 concern statements. And again, you can see that these items have been grouped into 5 domains: on safety, device handling and adjustment, service delivery model, counseling and audiological care, and also about optimal benefit and long-term harm. To simplify these results, I have clubbed the results into three items instead of 5 items. For instance, if users said they agree or strongly agree, that is included as agree in blue bars. And then if they answered it as disagree or strongly disagree, that has been grouped into disagree. And then the neutral statements are kept the same. And as you can see here, we see a lot of blue. That means, hearing healthcare professionals generally agreeing to consent statements about OTC hearing aids, sharing the sentiments that they have a lot of concerns about OTC hearing aids. When we take a look at these results closely, it seems like the concerns are, a lot of concern tend to be on safety as well as on counseling and audiological care. You see that, the items highlighted here, miss medical red flags, not being able to accurately predict hearing loss, best practice audiological care is more important, will not be educated on effective communication strategies, and also item will not be educated on realistic expectations. These are the 5 statements where 90% of the users agreed, saying that these are a huge concern. And there are also a few statements where they had, relatively less concerns. For instance, on one of the items on service delivery model, that means warranties and return periods will be worse, as well as on, some of the items on optimal benefit and long-term harm, such as consumers will give up amplification and do not provide good value. Only about 50% of the participants agreed to this consent statement, saying that those are not a huge concern. But overall, as you can see, there is a lot of blue shade in these bars, showing that hearing healthcare professionals generally agreed that OTC hearing aids are a huge concern. When we look at the participants, we found that there are 4 groups of participants, and this included audiologists, business owners, hearing instrument specialists, and students. And when we look at the association between demographic characteristics as well as the responses, we found some interesting things. For instance, audiologists tend to report or at least believe that consumers having problems in identifying and addressing common issues with hearing loss. And the OTC hearing aids will lead to greater confusion, ripped off by bad actors, and warranties and return period will be worse, is more likely when compared to other users. On the other hand, business owners tend to believe that consumers will give up on amplification, as well as OTC hearing aids are a significant safety concern, is more likely when compared to other types of respondents. And finally, we also wanted to look at, are there subgroup of users based on their responses? That means, are some of the hearing healthcare professionals more likely to rate the consent statement worse compared to others? So we performed a cluster analysis. And this resulted in two clusters. As you can see, just over 50% of the users, 51.2% of the users belong to cluster one, and we call that as a OTC hours. And then, nearly 50%, 49% of the users, fell into a second cluster, which we named as OTC apprehensive. And the difference between these two clusters is that the people who were in cluster one pretty much rated every item in the 17 statements, either strongly agree or agree. That means they had no neutral or positive sentiments towards OTC hearing aids. On the other hand, cluster two, the users in this group, they rated most of the items with a concerning statements, but there were some neutral and positive answers. That means that this group did not think that consumers will give up on amplification if they tried OTC hearing aids. They disagreed for that particular statement, and then they rated either neutrally or with disagreement for statements such as OTC hearing aids do not provide good value, and the warranty periods will be worse, and things like that. So overall, again, it seems like there are two types of hearing healthcare professionals. Some believe everything about OTC hearing aids is bad, and others believing mostly, that OTC hearing aids are concerning, although they have some neutral and positive sentiments. So now let's move on from there to another study that was published recently that focused on consumers. So we were not involved in this study. This study was conducted by some of our colleagues at Northwestern University and published in JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery. This is a survey that include mixed methods, and the survey was conducted during March 2022. And this survey was nested in a current clinical trial focusing on OTC hearing aids. So they, consecutively recruited people who participated in this research study, who are mainly U.S. residents who are at the age of 50 or above with no prior hearing aid experience. And more than 1,000 participants who completed this survey were included in this study. And the survey for this study included a 27-item questionnaire, which included some demographic information, as well as questions focusing on attitude towards direct-to-consumer hearing healthcare model. And they also ran a bunch of analysis, descriptive analysis, and also some additional analysis to look at who are likely to respond in which way and things like that. So here is some demographic information of the consumers who are included in the study. As you can see, the mean age is 61.4 years. The participants generally were females. 69% of the participants who completed the survey were females, and 65% of the participants were white race. And then 40% of the participants who were in the study were also retired. So this particular slide provides information about participants' comfort towards purchasing hearing aids online. And you can see there are two types of responses. One response is about whether users found it comfortable or uncomfortable to purchase hearing aids online without a hearing test. And then the same statement about with hearing test. That means whether the user would find it comfortable or uncomfortable purchasing a hearing aid online if they were given a hearing test online. Okay. So the darker the shades here showing comfort towards purchasing hearing aid, and the lighter shades toward the right-hand side basically shows extreme uncomfortable towards purchasing hearing aids online. As you can see, without a hearing test, it seems like a large percentage of participants find it moderately or extremely uncomfortable in purchasing hearing aids online. Whereas if they were given a hearing test online, that response shifts quite a bit. That means many of the same respondents are fine purchasing hearing aids online if they're given a test, but not all. So this has some implications to how we do things within audiology. Nowadays there is a move towards providing hearing screening online. For instance, either a tone-based test using various smartphone applications, or using web widgets to provide, things like digits in noise hearing screening through Practice website. So what this data basically shows that providing some type of screening or some type of uh, assessment for consumers will make a big shift towards whether or not they purchase hearing aids online. And what is also interesting and surprising from this study is that most respondents reported discomfort purchasing hearing aids via direct-to-consumer pathways, with nearly 84% indicating that they would prefer to purchase hearing aids with a hearing healthcare profession with an in-person model. And when we look at the response in relation to demographic characteristics, it seemed like older adults and those who had a higher income, income of 150,000 or more, and also those who are not interested in purchasing hearing aids were less likely to purchase hearing aids online or pursue hearing healthcare online. On the other hand, those who had previous experience with a direct-to-consumer healthcare model, or those who did not have insurance coverage for the hearing aids, or if they were uncertain about insurance coverage for hearing aids, then they were more likely to pursue hearing healthcare online. Okay, so I found these results to be interesting because it seems like there is still a lot of discomfort from consumers on pursuing hearing healthcare using virtual methodologies. So now let's look at some practice implications. That means, what does these results mean to us? So one thing that occurred to me when I was looking at this, as well as looking at over-the-counter or direct-to-consumer healthcare movement in general. That means while over-the-counter hearing aids are relatively new, we have over-the-counter healthcare products, for instance, OTC medications, or various types of direct-to-consumer healthcare products that have been available in the market for several decades. And when such products became available, for instance, when OTC medications became available in the US market several decades ago, there were fairly similar concerns from physicians as well as consumers about using OTC medications, including concerns about cost and adverse events and things like that. Whereas now, if you move forward a couple of decades after, we see that OTC medications have become integral part of healthcare process. So that means when we see our primary care, if they need to prescribe certain drugs which are over the counter, they would basically discuss that with us. And in fact, many of us would now seek over the counter medications on a routine basis without any fear towards such medications. So what this basically tells me is that awareness and education towards OTC hearing aids may address some of the concerns expressed both by hearing healthcare professionals as well as consumers. Okay, so I talk to audiologists across the US quite often, and most audiologists have not had any experience with OTC hearing aids. They have not had any hands-on experience. And in my opinion, that may be one of the concerns why the survey results were fairly negative towards OTC hearing aids. And the second point I want to make is by using some of the recently published data from Larry Humes on unmet needs in hearing healthcare. So this is a busy slides, and let me just kind of go through this. So the top bars here with blue shades basically show data for males, and the bottom graphs with pink shades show the data for females. And the left-hand side bars with basically show data based on hearing sensitivity that is measured using pure tone audiogram. and the hearing loss classified using a World Health Organization hearing impairment grade into mild, moderate, and moderately severe. And in the right hand, we have data based on trouble hearing. In other words, self-reported hearing disability. And again, classified into a little trouble, moderate trouble, and a lot of trouble. And what you can see here is that those who are currently using hearing aids or ever used a hearing aid or an assistive listening devices tend to be very small in the mild category or a category with a little problem. That means nearly 90% or more of the people with mild hearing impairment category doesn't own a hearing aid or have not used a hearing aid ever. Okay. And that kind of percentage tends to come down when we go to moderate and moderately severe category. That means to say that there seems to be a large unmet need of hearing healthcare, particularly in the mild to moderate hearing loss group. And when you look at the OTC hearing aids, and these are meant to be for people with perceived mild to moderate hearing loss. Okay, so one way of thinking about the OTC space is that the OTC hearing aids are meant for people from a different population than those who we serve in the clinic. And the final point I want to make about practice implication is the difference between need and demand. So the previous slide on unmet need basically suggested that there are a lot of people who could be served using a range of devices, including OTC hearing aids. But in my opinion, I don't think there has been a clear demand that has been demonstrated yet. At the University of Colorado Health, UC Health, where I currently practice and oversee clinical operations, we have just introduced the OTC hearing aid protocol that includes kind of two steps. First, after we complete a hearing test, we let the patient know if they are a candidate for an OTC hearing aid or if they're not a candidate for various reasons. And in the second step, if they do come back for a hearing aid consultation sessions, we do make sure to discuss OTC hearing aids as one of the options if they are a candidate. If they're people with mild to moderate hearing loss, then we bring up the discussion of OTC hearing aids into the consultation session. And what we are seeing is that even after mentioning about OTC hearing aids, very few patients kind of ask a follow-up questions or show interest in OTC hearing aids. In other words, they are interested in, they've come to us because they're interested in pursuing prescription hearing aids. So what this is telling us is that, so this may be a separate population. And one thing that has also become apparent to us doing this is basically, discussion about OTC hearing aids may help us build trust in hearing healthcare professionals. I had a patient last week who was a 67-year-old female with multiple health problems and with a mild to moderate sloping hearing loss. I did recommend her to come back to us for a hearing aid consultation. And her immediate response was that she has multiple health issues and her insurance does not cover hearing aids and there is no way she will come back. And then I also discussed the option of OTC hearing aids and talk to her saying that some of the preset OTC hearing aids could be as low as $200 to $300. And she was pleasantly surprised and wanted to kind of look into that more with the view that she wanted to get some help using these OTC hearing aids as hearing aids are unaffordable. Again, affordability may not be an issue for many patients, but I just wanted to kind of make a point saying that there are people who could use OTC hearing aids for various reasons. And just to summarize what we've been talking so far, based on the recent studies, it is kind of apparent that both hearing healthcare professionals as well as consumers have hesitation towards OTC hearing aids and direct-to-consumer hearing healthcare models. It may take time, potentially a decade or longer for OTC hearing aids and direct-to-consumer hearing healthcare models to take off. In my opinion, looking at the hearing aid landscape as well as some recent data that is coming out, It is likely that OTC hearing aid consumers are a very different group when compared to clinical sample that we are currently serving. Efforts are needed to educate hearing healthcare professionals as well as our consumers on OTC hearing aids, as well as efforts are needed to remove barriers to facilitate uptake of OTC hearing aids and direct-to-consumer hearing healthcare models. So with that note, I conclude my talk. Here are my contact details. I'll be happy to take any questions if you have by email. Also wanted to share details of an event. I conduct an annual seminar in Colorado. This is a hybrid event, opportunity for people to participate either in person or online. And this will be happening on July 29th. And this year, the seminar theme is on OTC hearing aids. So if you're interested in this topic, you're welcome to join us. So here is the event link as well as the QR code. So thank you all for joining this, and I hope to hear from you if you have any questions.